if you played Elden Ring before, you probably know about Miquella, the Empyrean. If only just because you died to one specific boss often enough that you still hear his name in your sleep. Ever since the base game released, he was one of the more mysterious characters that we were really only able to speculate about. With so many small pieces of lore on him spread through the game, he was always set up to be more important as the story progresses. And well, in the DLC, we finally got more of him. And narratively, he is such an amazing character, probably one of the most multifaceted ones in the whole game. Which is why I want to make this video, to take apart the major themes around him, especially in connection to his mother. I do not want to summarize all the pieces of lore we found in the DLC in this video. There are some others who did this already and who honestly did an amazing job at it, so I am sure if you look it up on YouTube, you will find a lot of information on what the actual facts are that you can find in-game. What I want to do is to take a closer look at the symbologies and thematic ideas within the stories, the characters and their relationships, and how they could be important for the larger narrative. Which means I will be talking about Elden Ring's story in this video, including information from the DLC. So if you don't want to get spoiled, this is the place to stop. I can totally understand if you want to experience the story by yourself before you listen to some speculative ideas in a YouTube video, so yeah, just a heads up. I might also make some connections to other pieces of media, but I will try to keep the spoilers to a minimum. I will, however, assume that most people who watch this video have already played the game or have watched some content on Elden Ring lore, so I won't go too much into detail on certain things. If there are any questions or if I go too fast over some ideas, just leave a comment. I will try to get into it as good as I can, and I'm sure there will be others as well joining the discourse. That being said, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to stay up to date with any future videos that I make. And let's get into it. Let's start with Miquella. Miquella is clearly a reference to Jesus Christ, similar how Godfrey is based on the character of King Arthur. His symbol is, although it looks a bit different, still a cross, and the idea of love, compassion, and sacrificing oneself for the good of the world are very common themes in Christian mythology when talking about Jesus. We get to know quite a lot about Miquella throughout the game. He's a child of Queen Marika, the god of the current age, and her consort Radagon, who we know is but an aspect of Marika herself. Once again, not all that different from the story of the birth of Jesus Christ. Being born of only a single god, he was an Empyrean, a candidate who might one day become a god himself. This is apparently not the only way to be selected as an Empyrean, but it is suggested that it is a guaranteed way to reach this status. Rani, who was a daughter of Radagon and the Carian queen Renala, was also an Empyrean. The drawback, however, seems to be that other than Rani, Miquella and his twin sister Malenia were born afflicted. While Malenia was cursed with rot and in a constant state of pain and decay, Miquella was not able to grow old and would stay an eternal child. At this point, we can mention that the results of incestuous relationships are a topic often discussed in the works of J.R.R. Martin, who famously assisted in the writing of Elden Ring. Many of the characters in his books are suffering from afflictions due to this. Culturally speaking, incest is something frowned upon, probably because it was well known that this practice can easily lead to offspring that will have to fight with a variety of problems, which did not stop especially many European noble families to try and keep their bloodlines clean, mostly by intermarrying. And the union of Marika and basically another part of herself could technically be seen as probably the most extreme form of intermarriage that there is. Narratively speaking, it is a strong symbol for children or younger generations having to suffer for the mistakes of their parents. There is not much information on what drove Marika to take Radagon as her consort after she banished Lord Godfrey, since they are famously shown as polar opposites. Marika was found to be responsible for breaking the Elden Ring. Radagon tried to mend it. Melna's dialogue even states,
"Thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self."
Suggesting even stronger that this might not have been a very happy union. In his youth, Miquella spent most of his time trying to find a cure for his affliction and the one of his sister, who therefore became deeply loyal towards him. He proved to be a prodigy in the study of Golden Order fundamentalism, a branch of faith that aims to truly understand the workings of the world. However, he came to the conclusion that the Golden Order would not be able to cure them, so after a while he abandoned it in favor of his own ideas. He was still looking for ways to right the wrongs in the world, though. His unalloyed gold was able to not cure, but at least keep the wrath of his sister at bay. He also looked for ways to cure his brother Godwyn, and he was known to accept all manner of shunned creatures and outcasts to Elphael, his city at the edge of the lands between. This is where Miquella also tried to nurture his own version of the Erdtree, using his own blood, which was known as the Halig tree, which in the end he became a part of. A lot of people see this as a symbol of Miquella trying to grow up, of him seeing his childlike nature as a weakness, and hoping that by growing, which a tree obviously is a symbol for, he might be able to gain powers that would help him to make the world a better place. At some point he was stolen away by Moog and entered the lands of Shadow, where he goes through the steps of becoming a god himself. You could argue again that this is a very Christian image, Jesus walking through mortal life towards his promised divine destination. Joseph Campbell, however, argues that the road of trials is a archetypal element of many mythological figures, and an important part of their quest in general. One of my favorite books is Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, where the author describes a character's journey to enlightenment, closely inspired by Buddhist tales and stories. The protagonist goes through life as an intellectual, a rich person, and an ascetic, only to figure out that none of those ideologies give him the answers in life that he looks for. However, he also acknowledges that the experience of going through those stages was important to reach his goal, or to even understand his own questions properly. Which is what I believe is similar to what Fromsoft tried to show with all the different stages of Miquella's journey. It also helps us to empathize with Miquella as a character. Contrary to many other Fromsoft characters, where we often have to guess many of the reasonings behind their actions, Miquella gets a lot of exposition, and his reasons for wanting to become a god are comparably easy to understand. We can understand that Miquella saw and experienced a lot of wrong in the world and sought to remedy it. But as so often in those games, the situation is not that easy and things might not be as clear as they seem. And to better understand this, I want to take a quick look at Miquella's mother, Marika. From what we know through the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, Marika was actually born in what is now known as the Land of Shadow. In the shaman village, we find an incantation and a talisman, both of which suggest that this was actually once Marika's home. So she apparently was a shaman, which is usually a term for a person that occupies a more spiritual role within a community, usually in more animistic, more nature-centric societies, which was apparently also true for Marika's people, as it seems that due to them being shamans, they were used by the Hornsent, the people of the tower, for divine rituals, as we can learn in Bonny Village, another village that seemed to be occupied by shamans. Those rituals were very brutal. From what we know, the Hornsent cut up their victims and put them into jars, in order for them to become saints. Since shamans seem to have the ability to mend together with other flesh, this seemed to make them prime candidates for this process. But why would the Hornsent do something like this? My guess is that it has to do with the crucible. We know that the Hornsent consider the crucible and its aspects divine. Horns, feathers, and knots were not seen as grotesque like in Leyndell, but as a holy gift, a sign of being chosen by the powers of the lands. My guess is even, and this is just speculation, that there isn't really a difference between Hornsent and Omen. It's just a different word for people born with aspects of the crucible, just from different cultures. The fine crucible feather talisman reads, Hornsent view the crucible as sacred for the refinement wrought through its evolutionary gifts. And from the aspects of the crucible thorns, we know that in an age-long past, before this land was enshrouded in shadow, the vitality of the crucible flourished. Remains of this can be seen in the ancient ruins. So we can say quite confidently that the power of the crucible was strong in the lands that are now known as the Lands of Shadow. And if we remember one important part of the crucible, it is that it was a combination of all life. The aspect of the crucible breath incantation reads, an aspect of the primordial crucible, where all life was once blended together. In the aforementioned ruins, we also find Devonia, a crucible knight, which is also interesting since many crucible knights are found in places that might hide hints to the origins of the Erdtree, close to its roots in the Eternal Cities, but also in places that were a bit more of a mystery to me so far. For example, I never really understood Tanith's knight. Why are they protecting someone in Volcano Manor? I actually believe that the DLC gave us kind of an answer to this question too. Tanith devours Rykard, just as the serpents aim to devour the world, and also Mesmer's Abyssal Serpent feeds on his fire. The act of feeding on something can also be seen as becoming one with it, as making something part of yourself. This is actually very common symbolism for food. The idea of every kind of individual life stemming from one singularity, from one primordial soup or primordial egg, is also something that we have seen a lot of times before in myth and creation narratives all over the world. So it is not that far-fetched that the Hornsent, who see the crucible as divine, would consider the shaman's ability to mend their flesh with others as something divine as well, to an extent that they wanted to use it in ritual sacrifice. An offer to divinity, so to say. Blood sacrifices are not something unheard of even in real-life cultures. The shamans are supposed to become saints, to be transformed into something that is closer to the original form of life in the crucible.
See thy purpose now, clear as day. A sacrifice thou wouldst make of me, the sacred beast that peereth fully wroth. Such tumult it reeketh from within thee. Oh, feast upon these aged bones, sacred beast. Wolf down every crumb and wax fully wroth. If this direful act deserves the judgment thou shalt upon Marika's offspring loose, then for thy cause will I gladly succumb.
This is where different views, different ideologies come into play. The shamans are not seen as individuals, they're seen as a tool, as just a small part of something bigger, which is basically what the whole crucible is about. In a culture that centers itself around a concept where all life is actually just one, there is not that much space for individuality. Becoming a saint, as it is said, might have been Marika's fate as well, if she was born a shaman in the rule of the Hornsent. However, something seemed to have happened that made Marika align with the Tower folk, since, as we know when we talk to the Hornsent Grandam, Marika and the Golden Order are considered traitors. Not just enemies, but traitors.
They who betrayed us, they who burned us.
And I think the reason for this was the tower, Enir Lim. At some point, the Hornsent started constructing a spiraling tower, which was once again most likely a religious endeavor. The Spira spell reads, "The spiral is a normalized crucible current that one day will form a column that stretches to the gods." And we can also find a reference to Enir Lim in the Spiral Tree seal, where it reads, "The majesty of the White Tower stretching to reach the gods." We see spirals a lot in Elden Ring. The shape of the Fingerslayer blade and the sword of the Elden Beast, the necks of both Placidusax and Meteor, Marika's bracelets, and even her and Radagon's hairstyle, the Shard Spiral spell, the Godslayer Greatsword, the Prince of Death's Staff, the Bolt of Grandsex, and even the serpents coiling around the Devourer's Scepter or Carian Regal Scepter incorporate spiral design. Spirals are a common symbol for creation or growth and expansion, an idea of matter manifesting outwardly, developing and growing. But you can also read them the other way, as everything on the outside converging back into one. Not so different from the Golden Order's laws of causality and regression, if you think about it. The most obvious reference to non-video game myth is obviously the Tower of Babel, which was supposed to reach the heavens and put humans metaphorically on the same level as God. A fun little detail, if you look up depictions of the Tower of Babel, it is often even depicted as a spiral. The story is usually about human vanity and arrogance, which is not that far from what happens to the Hornsent in Elden Ring. But how would the Hornsent achieve their goals? How would they reach godhood, as referred to in the item descriptions? And, well, I believe this is where the tower is connected to the jar rituals. Now, I might be totally wrong about this, what follows is mostly speculation, but I do believe that the name of the tower, Enir Lim, comes not from Latin or Welsh, as some people on the internet speculate, but actually from Quenya, the language of the High Elves from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. There is no actual reference for this, I could be totally wrong, but whenever I pronounce that name I just have to think about elves, I can't help it. It somehow just fits very well, and wouldn't even be the first time in FromSoft's history that they might have used Quenya. If you look up the translation for Haven of the Sun, you would get Anorlonda, which is eerily similar to a certain location in Dark Souls. And Enir Lim could be derived from Enir, which means to be named, and Ili, which stands for all or many or some kind of multitudes in general. I do admit it is a bit out there, but this could easily refer to the sainthood ritual of the jars we talked about, since we did speculate about this being about combining life into one, like it was in the Crucible. The moment you enter Enir Lim in the late stage of the game, you will find inquisitors seemingly worshipping trees. This was quite strange to me, since I always thought the tree guys were the enemies of the Hornsent, but at a closer look you could see that those trees seem to sprout from masses of people, like the saints from jars, kind of put to a next level. Similar masses of people can actually even be seen at the roots of the Erdtree, in the boss rooms of many catacombs around the lands between, even in the base game. And both Farum Azula and the Eternal Cities have parts where it looks like the place itself was made from, or at least incorporated, the bodies of their inhabitants. And of course, if you keep climbing the tower, you will find another area that seems to be comprised of people's bodies as well. The Gate of Divinity. While we do not know that much about this structure, it is hinted at that this is what allowed both Marika and Miquella to ascend to godhood. And just thinking about the amount of lives it must have taken to construct this thing is terrifying. I think that here we arrive at the aforementioned betrayal. The gate was most likely constructed by the Hornsent. It is in the middle of their tower, but in one of the trailers for the DLC we saw that Marika was there as well. Why was that? Was there something about her the Hornsent needed? Maybe it was the fact that she was an Empyrean? It could be that this is what connects her to the Hornsent Grandam, who in the description of the Watchful Spirit incantation is called Empyrean Grandam. Was she also a candidate for godhood? I am once again leaning out quite a bit, but could she have some connection to the Glowmite Queen maybe? The Watchful Spirits look different, yes, but they do have some similarities to Blackflame, and the Godskins are wearing clothes that also combine different lives into one. The Godskin Noble could actually easily be a homage to the saints in the jar, if you think about it. The Godskin Noble's robe even references the Crucible. Nobles are the most ancient apostles, who are said to have assimilated inhuman physiology. Not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in its primordial form. But this is probably a topic for a different video. The term Empyrean is interesting in this context, however, since this is probably the first time we hear something that usually references the Greater Will in the lore of the Hornsent. Empyreans are candidates for godhood, and they are chosen by the Two Fingers, who are said to be envoys of the Greater Will. There is a lot more lore on the Fingers in this DLC, but for now let's just say that it is very likely that the rise of the Fingers was somehow influencing the Hornsent, and was probably what made them cooperate with Marika. The main reason that I think this is the case that even though we don't hear much about the Fingers from the Hornsent, there is one piece of lore that forms a very interesting connection. When you get to Ymir's quest, there are two characters you meet called Jolan and Anna, the sword hands of the night. The two of them are definitely connected to the Fingers, not just because of their close ties to Ymir, but their armor is decorated with flowing lines in the seeming shape of a fingerprint. The description of Jolan and Anna's spirit ashes reads that Jolan and Anna were born in a cold, dark jail, where they were raised, deprived of light, to be swords hand of night. And the place where you find their armor, the night set, is Bonny Jail, the same place where the Hornsent conducted their rites with the shamans. Now, I would say that this implies that the Fingers did have at least some interest into the practices of the Hornsent. However, what would happen was that Marika and the Fingers only used the Hornsent, used their gate, or even maybe had them constructed in the first place for their own plans. And I think Miquella was about to do just the same.
You must kill Miquella. Grant him forgiveness.
One of my favorite comic books of all time is Watchmen. And there is one character from this story I had to think about a lot while working my way through Eldenring lore. And the character is Dr. Manhattan. The story of Dr. Manhattan is pretty much the modern equivalent to a regular person's ascension to divinity. The further we get in the narrative, the stronger he becomes, but the more of his humanity he actually loses. Miquella undergoes a similar journey on his quest through the lands of shadows. Only you might argue that Miquella's fate is even more tragic. Miquella's biggest asset is his compassion. He wants to become a god from the heartfelt wish to make the world a better place. Not just for him, but for everyone. He feels the suffering of others. In order to reach his goal, however, he has to let go of everything that connects him to mortality. Just to enter the lands of shadow, he had to forsake his body. And as he arrives, we can read on his crosses that he kept abandoning parts of himself. The most well-known instance being him abandoning Saint Trina, which he labeled as his love. A spirit NPC close to the cross, one of his followers, even asks himself, how will you salvation offer to those who cannot be saved, when you could not even save your other self? At the end of Watchmen, it is hard to say if Dr. Manhattan even really cares about humans anymore, if he is even able to care anymore, or if he has surpassed this stage already. What happens to Miquella seems to be very similar. The further he gets, the less human he seems. The less he can relate to human needs and desires. He used Moog, but didn't seem to care about him in the end. Melania he left behind, just as well as all the people at the Erdtree. Melania is actually another example of a character that struggles with her need for individuality. I said earlier that she was very loyal to Miquella, but she seemed to have been doubtful at times too. Millicent suggests that Melania had to divest a part of herself in order to march south to fight Radahn, probably very similar to how Miquella let go of Saint Trina.
There is something I must return to Melania, the will that was once her own, the dignity, the sense of self that allowed her to resist the call of the Scarlet Rot, the pride she abandoned, to meet Radahn's measure.
And even Radahn seems not to be very keen on serving Miquella, as it seems that he took incredible measures to not die and follow Miquella to the Lands of Shadow.
Godhood would be Miquella's prison. The caged divinity is beyond saving.
In a tragedy, there is no happy end. The heroes act with noble intentions, but are usually subject to a world that just works in different ways, or they are acting on flawed premises. You could argue that both Miquella's and Marika's quests were doomed to fail from the very beginning, probably because of their utter selflessness. In Jungian psychology, there is the idea of mirroring, which describes the development of one's personality through the influence of an outside factor. The most typical example being a mother's influence on their child. I think this happens too on a narrative level. History repeats itself. Miquella is trying to change his mother's world by repeating the same steps she did, by mirroring her, which was ultimately his flawed premise. Now, there is definitely much more to talk about fire, about serpents and original sin, but I realized I was already taking quite a while. The video was already getting longer than I hoped, and I didn't want to go on too much of a tangent. If you want me to cover those ideas as well, just let me know in the comments and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any other videos. But I think that's it for today. I hope you liked the video, and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye bye.